What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be smashing out yet another hero guide, this time focusing on Lando Calrissian. In my opinion, Lando is a pretty underrated hero in terms of how much you see him get used. I know I don't give him nearly as much attention as I should, as he's definitely a very good character, and I know the same goes for a lot of players out there as well. So hopefully this guide can help shed a bit of light and show you guys a few ways to improve your gameplay with Lando. Now, these guys have been getting increasingly longer every time I make one, as I keep finding important areas that I should touch on. So at the end of the video, let me know whether you think it went for too long or anything like that, as I am hoping to try and perfect this series heading into Dooku and Anakin season over the next few months. With that out of the way though, we are going to go ahead and get stuck right into it. So we're going to start off with Lando's base stats, and like I mentioned in all of these hero guides, all of these stats have been double checked by both myself and one of my subscribers, and there will be a link in the description where you can find his Reddit post with all of these stats. Now, we both tested these in arcade, and while I'm 99% sure all of these stats do transfer over to multiplayer, just bear in mind that there is always a chance that some stats may change from arcade to multiplayer. So if you see any stats that don't seem right, then definitely feel free to let me know down in the comment section. So first off, we're going to take a look at his base HP, and he does sit pretty much right in the middle of all the blaster users in the game, coming in with 650 HP. On top of that, he does also have 150 health regen, which is again somewhere in the middle or more towards the lower side compared to all the other blaster heroes. So in terms of his health, he's roughly what you'd expect, although he does have 2 health related star cards to improve those stats, so I will touch on those a little later on. His weapon of choice is his X8 Night Sniper, and this is a pistol style blaster with a super high rate of fire and a medium to low damage. Since it does have such a high rate of fire, the lower damage doesn't really matter quite as much, but you do need to make sure you're hitting your targets, because otherwise it can land you in a bit of trouble very quickly. It deals roughly 40 damage per shot to the body, 76 damage per shot to the head, and as you can see, the drop off at distance isn't really very much at all, so there's not much of a change at all when it comes to the range. With that being said, it does have a fairly wide spread on it, and so even though the range is pretty decent, you will still need to slow down your shots if you are to land a few hits in a row at longer distance. Now, this blaster does also have a night vision and heat vision combination as a scope, which does allow you to see through smoke and stuff like that, which comes in handy quite often, and I'll touch on that a little bit more as we get into his abilities. Now, keep in mind, these stats aren't 100% accurate, as it is pretty hard to get them all exactly right, but these are pretty much the averages of a whole heap of tests, so they definitely are very close to being as accurate as possible. Now, moving on to his abilities, and he does have a very well-rounded set of abilities, with some being defensive and some being offensive, and each ability is definitely very useful in the right situation. His L1 ability is his smoke grenade, and this is what I was referring to before when I was talking about the night and heat vision scope on the blaster. This smoke grenade explodes on impact, creating a smoke screen that obviously only you will be able to see through. There are a few random things that can see through it, which I touched on in my first episode of Battlefront 2 Mythbusters, but for the most part, any regular trooper won't be able to see you through the smoke, even though you will still be able to see them with your heat vision, and it does also block the lock-on from turrets too, which is definitely one of the most handy features to the smoke grenade. This ability is really handy for getting out of a tough situation. If you get into trouble, you can easily throw it down and then try and take out your enemies through the smoke, or even just run to safety to recover before getting back into the fight. Its only downfall is that it can often provide a false sense of safety. Oftentimes it makes you feel as though you can't be damaged, but at the end of the day, they can still damage you through the smoke, so you do still need to be very careful when you're trying to run to cover. Moving on to his L1 R1 ability, and this one is called Sharp Shot. Now, this is by far his best ability, and honestly, I'd probably rank it up there as one of the better abilities in the whole game, as it is essentially a free multi-kill if you can manage to spot a few enemies. This ability auto locks onto up to 5 enemies at once, and when you pull the trigger, it will shoot all 5 targets, dealing 200 damage per shot, meaning it will one-shot any regular trooper class, providing they haven't received a buff. This ability is probably the best in the game when it comes to regenerating health, as you can gain back a quick 100 HP each time you manage to get a 5-man multi with it, and it does also recharge extremely quickly, so it's definitely up there as one of the most useful abilities of any in the game. Its only downside is that it can often cancel the lock-on just as the enemy runs around the corner, meaning it will still fire off the shot and waste the recharge meter, even though technically it had no chance at all at working, but overall it is still definitely a very good ability and easily Lando's best ability as well. Moving on to the R1 ability, and this one is Lando's Disabler. Now, Lando throws down a device that sticks to any surface and it reveals any nearby enemies on the radar. If you press R1 again, it then explodes and turns into a stun device, which is definitely its most useful purpose, and even though the stun does only last for 2 seconds all up, it is still very useful for taking out enemies without too much trouble at all. This ability is super useful against enemy villains, especially when you need a last resort to save yourself, and stunning the enemy combined with some easy headshots will more often than not save you from an almost certain death. Its only real setback is that it doesn't stay active for very long when you activate the stun, although at the end of the day a 2-second stun is definitely better than nothing, so overall it is still yet another very handy ability. So that's it for all of his base stats and abilities. Now we're going to move on to some of the more important stuff, starting with his best star cards for Galactic Assault. Obviously it does really come down to personal preference, so these definitely aren't the only cards that you can use, but these are just the 3 or 4 cards that I think are the most important and most well suited cards for Galactic Assault. So the first card I'm going to recommend is his Easy Win Star card, and this is of course his health on kill card, so this is by far his most important card to choose. I'm sure you guys know the drill by now. This card will award you with 20 HP per regular trooper kill and up to 100 HP per villain kill, depending on how much you have upgraded the card. The next card I'd recommend using, and another one relating to his health pool, is the Hot and Cold Star card. This card allows Lando to have an increased maximum base HP, adding up to 150 HP when you max the card out, meaning he can actually have up to 800 HP at all times, which is definitely very useful. The third card I'm going to recommend is his Wide-Eyed Star card, and what this does is it increases the range at which his Sharp Shot can target enemies, which allows for a much easier lock-on, leading to plenty more easy kills with the Sharp Shot ability. Now, this is the card that I tend to use as the third card, but another card I definitely recommend from time to time is his Maximized Efficiency card, which again relates to the Sharp Shot ability. This makes it so that whenever Sharp Shot hits 3 or more enemies, the recharge time will be reduced for the next one, pretty much meaning you can use the Sharp Shot a fair bit more often. Now this card is probably equally as good as the other card that I recommended, so it really is up to you which one you use, and to be honest it is good to change it up from time to time anyway. Most of the time I find myself using the Wide-Eyed card instead, but I thought I'd throw this card in anyway as it definitely is deserving of a mention as well. Now like I said, these are the 3 cards that I'd personally recommend using. However, if you do disagree, then definitely feel free to let us all know down in the comments section, as there really is no right or wrong when it comes to choosing something like star cards. So now moving on to some of the best maps to choose Lando on when you are playing Galactic Assault, and the top 3 that I've picked are Geonosis, Starkiller Base and Endor. Geonosis suits Lando perfectly as his Sharp Shot and Smoke are perfect for the map, and his Night Sniper Scope combined with the Sandstorms in Phase 2 and 3 are a match made in heaven, so he's definitely worth giving a shot on Geonosis. As for Starkiller and Endor, honestly my only reasoning behind these maps is that these are the ones that I've found to work the best for myself. There's really no specific reason other than they definitely work well for me whenever I do play as Lando. Now obviously this doesn't mean that these are the only 3 maps that you can choose him on, and to be honest Lando can really do pretty well on almost every single map in the game, but if I had to pick 3 maps that I could only ever play as Lando on, then these would definitely be my own personal choices. As for some maps to avoid, and to be honest I'd actually have to say that I don't think there are any maps to avoid choosing Lando on. He's a pretty well-rounded hero and he can genuinely do extremely well on almost every single map, so I don't really have any choices when it comes to maps where I think you should avoid him. Now as for some tips for Galactic Assault, and the main one that I would have to say is to try and make the most of his Sharp Shot ability whenever possible. It's pretty much a guaranteed kill on any regular trooper that does get targeted, and even if they have been buffed and managed to survive, you can easily take them out in 1 or 2 extra shots anyway. Try and get yourself into some good spots on the map where you have a good wide open view of your enemies, and as long as they're within range you're almost guaranteed to go on some monster streaks without really having to do too much at all. The extra range card that I mentioned earlier is super helpful for picking enemies off with the Sharp Shot at a bit of a longer distance, which again usually means that you'll be much less likely to take any damage of your own. Now on maps where there are plenty of close quarters areas, and especially any maps that you're playing as the defending team, his Disable Beacon is also a massive help at not only revealing your enemies but then also stunning them and leaving them open to a very easy attack, again reducing the chance of taking any damage of your own. Like I mentioned, his Smoke Grenade can also be deadly if you do use it in the right situations, as essentially it turns you invisible for a few seconds while still leaving your enemies completely open to attack. Just make sure to stay on the move once you have thrown down the smoke. If you throw it down and then stay in the same spot, then there's a good chance that the enemies will still be able to find you, and at that point the smoke pretty much becomes useless, so definitely stay on the move when the smoke has hit the ground. Other than that, just play it smart rather than too aggressively. However, you should also feel confident enough to be able to push up to choke points and objectives, and know that you do have your Sharp Shot and Disable by your side if anything does happen to take a turn for the worse. Lando can struggle quite a bit when he gets overwhelmed by multiple enemies at once, so again, just make sure you use the disabler and keep an eye on the minimap, and if you do get in too much trouble, then throw down your smoke and try and get yourself back to the safety of some cover or a few teammates. So that is going to be it for the Galactic Assault tips. Now we're going to move on to some tips for the hero versus villain game modes. Now starting off with the best star cards, and the first one we're going to mention is the Quick Shock star card, which should replace your health on kill card, as that one isn't quite as useful in HVV and Hero Showdown. This card pretty much makes it so that your stun will last a little longer if you do set it off within 5 seconds of throwing it, which will almost happen all the time anyway in these modes, as this ability is mainly used for the stun rather than the actual radar feature. As for the other two cards, these are both cards that I mentioned for Galactic Assault as well, so nothing too much to go over for these two. The Hot and Cold card that gives you extra base HP is easily the most important for these modes, and the extra range from the Wide-Eyed card can also be very handy when it comes to dealing some serious damage from a bit of a distance. These are the 3 cards that I personally use in these hero modes, but again, that doesn't mean that these are the only 3 cards to use, so definitely feel free to leave your own cards down below if you do tend to disagree with my choices. Now, moving on to some tips for the hero game modes, and honestly, Lando is pretty straightforward, so there isn't actually all that much that I need to talk about, as most of it really is common sense at the end of the day. Obviously, like I mentioned, his stun ability is dominant against enemy villains, so make sure to not only use that to protect yourself and get yourself some easy kills, but also to help your teammates out if they are in trouble or anything like that. Stunning an enemy that's attacking one of your teammates can be a very useful tactic, as it usually will pretty much completely turn the tides of that battle, and a support type role is definitely very well suited to Lando. Lastly, if you are going to use his sharp shot to try and kill an enemy, then it's always best to wait until you've emptied your clip into them before using the actual ability. If you use it first and then start shooting, there'll be a split second delay between the ability ending and being able to shoot, which can often allow them to get away. If you try and get them below 200 HP however, then it can pretty much be a guaranteed kill from there, so it's definitely best to think of it as a finisher rather than using it first and then following it up with your blaster. Now, in terms of some characters to avoid in these modes, and I definitely have to say that Vader, Grievous and Palpatine are probably the main characters to stay away from whenever possible. Vader and Grievous deal far too much damage and have such a high health pool that in a one-on-one it can be extremely hard to beat either of those two if the other player has even the slightest idea of what they're doing. As for Palpatine, his lightning can be absolutely deadly considering you have no way to defend yourself, and even though you can still definitely do very well against Palpatine, a good player will usually destroy you no matter how good you are, as he can move around so quickly and deal such crazy damage with his lightning. Not only that, but even with the smoke grenade down, he can still pretty much auto-lock onto you, so there's rarely any chance of defending yourself if the player using Palpatine has any idea of what they're doing. If you play it smart, stick close by to your teammates and make sure to make the most of your abilities whenever possible, you can definitely do very well as Lando in HVV and Hero Showdown. So that is going to be it for our Lando Hero Guide, guys. As these ones have been going a little longer than normal, I'd love it if you could let me know what you thought down in the comments section, as like I mentioned at the start, I am still trying to figure out this new format for the best hero guides possible. If you did enjoy the video, then make sure to leave a like down below. Not only does it help support the channel, but it does also let me know that you guys do want to see more of these updated hero guides. The next guide will hopefully be a Count Dooku hero guide, as he is arriving very soon, so let's hope he's relatively bug free on release, because if he is, then I'll definitely be doing my best to get a guide out as soon as possible. If you are new to the channel, then definitely feel free to subscribe and make sure to turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 guides or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Yeah, I'm responsible these days. It's the price you pay for being successful.